I'm Nicola Talent, and you can listen to my brand new podcast, Beast, The Murder of Nora Sheehan, streaming now, wherever you get your podcasts. We're going to start with the disappearance and the murder of a lady called Angie Smith. She was 27, a mother of 2 daughters, and it was 1987. So tell us what happened to her.
Well, the last sighting of Antoinette was she had attended the David Bowie concert in Slane with her friend and neighbour. Mm-hmm. And they, after the concert, they came back into the city. They went for a couple of drinks. There was a nightclub, as far as I know, in the old Gresham. Mm-hmm. And then they left that, met 2 people they knew, and her friend wanted to go home. But Antoinette wanted to party on. Yeah. Because actually Antoinette was staying with her friend that night, and so her friend just flung the keys on the ground and just departed. Antoinette then went to Delir Street, had something to eat, and then took a taxi with these 2 guys to Rathfarnham. And from there, we know nothing. Until 6 months later, this man was out walking with his 2 kids and his dog, and they were. It's kind of a bog area at Glendale Wood, and the next thing when they were going across there's a little stream, and then up into the bog, his daughter started screaming, and there was Antoinette Smith. The ditch where she had been buried had come away because of the water flow, and there she was.
So would she have been cast out of a car, or would she have been dragged to that place?
Oh no, there's no way would she have been cast out of a car. It's along the military road, and in fact the location was, as I said, there was a stream running parallel to the road, and there was a makeshift bridge, which was made actually out of the old base of a bed. Yeah. So you actually went across the stream by going on the side bits of the wooden part. That's how you got there. So there's no way you could drive a car up there. No.
One of these places that, as journalists, we kind of examine scenes as much as anything else, that you'd sort of maybe say you'd need to know the area.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And also one of the guards who was an inspector at the time who was investigating this, because that would have been based out of Rathfarnham, he always said that it must have taken 2 people to bring the body across. Mm-hmm. Now, I always argued with him that, in fact, even if you were a hunter or whatever, you would be used to carrying, kind of dead animals on your shoulder. And so I disputed that with him.
Yeah, yeah. So that brings us, and, we will come back to Antoinette Smith and the significance of it, but it brings us to 2 places. Firstly, to the mountains, and secondly, to the next sort of significant things that happens is a series of disappearances of women. I think their names are very familiar to people. Mm-hmm. The first one that's next from is it Jojo Dullard?
We have Annie.
Annie, of course.
Yeah.
Annie McCarrick, who was originally from Long Island in New York, and she disappeared in 1993. That's right. This is 6 years later. Yeah. Yeah. So, last confirmed sighting of her from memory was in Sandymount, where she was living, and she was supposed to have taken a bus up to go for a walk, possibly on her own. There's some dispute about all that, although they seem pretty sure that she took that bus.
Yes, it is. She was actually sighted at the bus stop in Ranelagh. In the queue ahead of her was this girl that she worked with.
Who would have known her.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So that's really the last positive sighting
Yeah.
we have of her.
And I suppose to explain that when they're looking for sightings in these mysterious disappearances, if somebody sees a photograph of somebody and they don't know them and they say, yes, I think I saw them on the bus, or yes, I definitely saw them on the bus, that's not as good a sighting as somebody who knows you,
Correct.
because you will not mistake, and you don't need to be shown a photograph. You know the person.
That's right.
And you may have nodded at them or whatever. But so that's a really, really firm sighting, isn't it?
It is. Oh, absolutely. And the other thing is, Nicola, that this person that she worked with, Annie was ahead of her in the queue.
Yeah.
And so she didn't actually, say hello to her.
Yeah.
And actually, Annie went upstairs on the bus.
Right.
Whereas the friend was only going a few stops, and she stayed downstairs.
Downstairs, yeah.
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 So, in fact, even that friend can't confirm where she got off the bus.
But the suspicion is she got off the bus up in the mountains and went for a walk. Again, we've no idea what happened
No.
after that. She just literally vanishes off the face of the earth.
Yeah. Also, Nicola, then we do know that she was intending to go walking, and the reason we know that is because she had called her friend Anne to see if Anne would go with her, and unfortunately, Anne she had a sore leg and she couldn't make it. You also have to look at the time frame because it's like March. And then you have, loss of light, and all those kind of things. And then there's, again, a police contact who, again, was an inspector in Bray at the time. He would have headed up the searches around Enniskerry. And his people would have interviewed the bus driver and, people who disembarked in Enniskerry. But
there was a huge amount of publicity around it, always was.
Massive.
She was an American student living here in Ireland, and her parents were distraught. Her mother remains.
Yes.
I think her father's passed away.
He has.
But they were very kind of media. They used the media a lot, even from the beginning, and there was lots of reconstructions done.
Correct.
And it certainly was never and is not a forgotten case.
No.
And yet, there's been no sign.
No.
So
really the question is, did she actually go into Enniskerry or did she get off the bus to meet someone before that?
Yeah.
On that journey.
Now, next is a kind of a cluster of disappearances. And what occurs is the Gardaí eventually set up a thing called Operation Trace in order to see if there's any links between these cases, if they can, they look at all sorts of things. I think people are interested in what they do look at, and they look at victimology and they look at, profiling offenders. They look at the last movements. They look to see if there's anything that links them. And what came of Operation Trace and what was their sort of discoveries about these women? And maybe we'll talk about the cases they looked at.
Okay.
So there was Fiona Pender, Ciara Breen, Fiona Sinnott, Jojo Dullard, Annie McCarrick. They were the women.
They
actually
targeted 6 women.
6 women,
as the kind of the main target, main target for Operation Trace.
Their remit was to see was there basically links
Any
between the
connection.
cases.
Yeah.
They weren't really encouraged to say the word serial killer ever, and try to avoid it as much as they could at the time. And that is quite understandable because it is going to create a hysteria if you're putting out in public that there's a Garda unit set up to try and find a serial killer. But I think what they found was, from their investigations, clear suspects for the case of Ciara Breen. She was 17 and from Dundalk in County Louth. She went missing in 97. For Fiona Sinnott, who was 19, from Rosslare in County Wexford, and she went missing in February 1998. And for Fiona Pender, a 25-year-old from Tullamore in Offaly, who went missing in 1996. So the other 3, Jojo Dullard, Ciara Breen, and of course Deirdre Jacob, who I had forgotten to mention in the beginning of it.
Yeah.
They were the cases that they sort of came away from Operation Trace seeing possible connections with.
Yes. I suppose because they were so, the geography and the last sightings are so closely positioned.
Geographically.
I suppose kind of around 30 kilometres from one to another.
Yeah.
And the time frame also, we're not talking years.
Yeah.
We're talking like months or maybe a year at the most. So this does give cause for concern.
Yeah, and to dig down deeper into that, I suppose, in the other cases where they continuously look for evidence and they're also looking for the remains
Correct.
of those women, even though none of those cases, I think, have been classified as a murder inquiry. But they all possibly had things going on in the background in their lives that created a suspect or certainly a person of interest in their cases. In the case of Deirdre Jacob, and she went missing in Newbridge on the 28th of July 1998, in the case of Jojo Dullard and in the case of Annie McCarrick, there was nothing going on in the background of their lives to suggest that there was anybody they had animosity with, that they were doing anything other than planning for the future. So they were kind of random, and also they just literally disappear. And I think in particular in the case of Deirdre Jacob.
But that was, the case of Deirdre Jacob was the one that kind of set off alarm bells.
Yeah.
Because she was home for the summer. She was doing teacher training in the UK, and she just finished her first year. She seemed to be happy. She'd gone that particular day to firm up her accommodation for the next year in the UK. She went to the bank in Newbridge, and that was to get money to then post to the accommodation address that she had agreed to take. She'd gone to visit her grandmum, who had a small shop again in Newbridge. Then she was walking home, seen by neighbours. Then about 400 metres from, or 400 yards or whatever, from her home, she was seen outside her house in Rosebery. And then she was gone. And the investigation into Deirdre's disappearance was pretty much like immediate. Within hours,
Right.
something was terribly wrong here.
And not a trace.
Not a trace. Not a trace.
Nothing left behind on the roadside outside the house.
Nothing.
Nobody saw any suspicious activity.
No.
She's
And actually,
there
and
1
funny,
minute
it's a very
gone.
busy road.
Yeah.
So it was extraordinary. Extraordinary.
I mean, I suppose for the detectives that started working on that, the hope, of course, is somebody's going to show up, that whatever has happened, or they've gone off and all the rest of it. She wasn't the type for a start.
No.
But it must have been utterly baffling for them to realise they got her almost to her front door.
Yeah. It's incredible. And also, if you think about it, the daring kind of move to abduct her on this road, which is busy. So the chances are, you're really pushing your luck here.
Yeah.
That you're not spotted. But that's what happened.
So Operation Trace, as we say, got underway, and they were quickly enough able to establish that maybe the other cases had clear suspects. These 3 cases are sort of kicking around in the same kind of area. Possibly there could have been the perpetrator, they couldn't, because of course every good detective will tell you have to keep an open mind, which is a boring thing when you're a journalist to have to write, but it's very true, because sometimes, you can go down one direction and close off your mind to everything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they were kind of keeping an open mind, but realising that they possibly were connected. And with that, I think as it was beginning to wind down Operation Trace, a man is arrested.
Yeah. This
So
was
tell
most
us what happened.
interesting.
Yes.
This was in 2000. You are right. It was beginning to wind down. Operation Trace. And then, you could almost say, out of the blue, came this offender. This man had abducted a young woman from Carlow. She had closed her business that evening. He approached her car, banged the door against her face, broke her nose, started saying, "Oh, give me the money," because it was her business and she had cash from the business. But that really wasn't what he was after at all. Now, again, this is the daring aspect, if you like. It was a car park in the middle of Carlow. He then made her take off her shoes and her bra. He tied her hands behind her back. He shoved her into the passenger's seat. Then drove a couple of yards to another part of the car park and then transferred her to the boot of his own car. Now, the chances again of being seen or somebody just coming out, it's extraordinary.
Yeah, really.
This guy is a risk taker.
Yeah.
Then he drove her to one location, which is about 40 kilometres from Carlow, Beaconstown. Then he raped her, then put her back into the car, and then drove again, I would say probably around 14 kilometres, took her out. She felt that when he was driving that she was going up kind of a hill. Then he took her out, brutally raped her again. And by absolute fluke, two came down the hill, and he became aware of the lamps, and one of them recognised him.
Right.
Which is like extraordinary. Then he had already put a plastic bag over her head. He'd already also told her the name of his kids, whatever else. So she knew the chances of her, being let go were remote almost. And then he was, as I said, he'd done the plastic bag, and then these two guys appeared absolutely out of nowhere. And that one of them recognised this person to be Larry Murphy.
Yeah.
And he sped the scene. They tried, spent a lot of time trying to calm her down. They brought her then eventually to Bolton Glass Police Station.
And that night, Larry Murphy went home to his wife.
He did.
And got into bed.
Indeed.
Slept.
Yep.
Next morning, police came to the door.
That's right.
And he went.
Because they had his house under surveillance overnight.
Yeah.
And when they arrived into the house to arrest him, he went to the bathroom, and one of the police, the guards, went with him, and all he kept on saying, "I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. I flipped." That was his only comment.
Thing that he had to say.
Yeah.
So this is the first time he's really come on the Garda radar, even
Correct.
though locally there's kind of reports of him acting a bit creepy in pubs around women, but I always wondered, were they in hindsight, do you know what I mean, when we know now what we know of him. And Larry Murphy became almost the bogeyman as he became linked to possibly a suspect in these missing women's cases. But people do talk about some of his behaviours. I think he was inappropriate with women, we can say.
Yes, he would. First of all, he was a loner, and he would sometimes make comments about women, or even to women, that he didn't like the way they dressed or their makeup, or those kind of things.
I remember talking to some people, and they would say, "Oh, he'd come into the pub and he'd just stare over," and they'd feel a bit creeped out by him. Somebody like that, a bit creeped out.
But I don't think it's kind of after the event. He was in a row between a couple of the guys in a pub, where he was inappropriate to one of their friends.
Right.
Carol.
And they
So-
stepped in. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was. It didn't just. These stories didn't just suddenly arrive after he was arrested.
Yeah.
They were already in the
ether.
yeah.
And he was a carpenter, and he was on the road a bit, and
Yeah, he was a master carpenter.
yeah.
His forte was making spiral staircases.
Right.
Yeah, and he would travel to sites and whatever else, and to projects. So he was, number one, a loner. Number two, he had the opportunity to move around the place.
And yet somebody who could marry and have children.
Correct.
You know.
Yeah.
He was living.
Almost like a, well, we can now say, was he living a double life?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So he's arrested for this horrendous rape, and you know, you always have to kind of say to people that while these cases are every woman's worst nightmare, they are very rare. It's not often that somebody comes along and picks a stranger up and does something like that to them.
Yeah, these are very, very rare.
Yeah.
And I suppose one of the interesting things about when I was doing the research initially was to find this cluster, if you like.
Yeah.
That, again, is incredibly rare. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So...
So Larry Murphy was, first and foremost, arrested for this crime that he'd been caught in the process of committing. And charges were levelled against him, and he would ultimately be brought to court. But the officers in Trace, which had sort of got their loose connections possibly between three victims, and had been through, you know, possible suspects. I'm sure they had a list of people, you know, violent towards women and etc. But they were really alert to this for a number of reasons, and these are some of the MOs that we're going to describe. Firstly, he had overcome her in such a public place.
Exactly.
And secondly, the area that he used and where he lived, because at some point during Operation Trace, they'd got a profile of who this perpetrator, if there was one, could be. And the profile said that he would have been local, that he would have been a family man, and he would have been sort of hiding in open sight in this sort of respectable world.
Yeah.
So the officers from Trace were immediately interested in this Larry Murphy guy.
Okay.
So what happens next?
What happens next? First of all, when he was arrested, he denied the charges or whatever. And then, of course, obviously he changed his plea. You also have to bear in mind, like, he was charged for several counts, not only of abduction, but several counts of rape, you know, at least 4.
Yeah.
And attempted murder.
Yeah.
So in the end, he pleaded guilty to all of those charges. And so, in other words, kind of shut down the case.
Yeah. Do you mean that we didn't have a trial?
No,
we didn't hear the evidence? We didn't see
nothing.
If he was ever going to... I mean, during a trial you get a kind of an intimacy even with the person in the dock, because you're watching them and you can see how they behave. And
Correct.
You can just get a little bit...
feeling.
You can get a feeling. So all of that was simply, he pleaded guilty.
Wiped.
And there was a victim impact statement from the lady in question.
Yeah.
She very bravely gave her victim impact statement. But not only that, she was able to, because she'd lived to tell the tale, she was able to give details, you know, insightful details about what happened to her. And they were able to then reverse the information she gave them to kind of profile Larry Murphy, really.
Correct.
And what he could have done before. From memory, wasn't there children's toys in the back seat?
Oh, that's right.
She felt around the car, and there was maybe a child seat in the car.
Oh, there definitely was a child seat.
Yeah.
You know, so again, that's the planning part, where who's ever going to suspect a vehicle, you know, with an abducted female in a car with a child seat.
Yes.
It was the perfect cover.
Yeah.
You know, and kids' toys, you know. So in that sense, he had planned it very well.
Yeah.
Now, we have to also remember that, you know, one of the things we did discover is that Larry Murphy was, number one, a loner, but number two, he was a very seasoned hunter. And, you know, with hunting, in other words, he had, over the years, he was used to waiting, observing, and then striking.
Yeah. And also maybe knowing a terrain, you know, in the area we've called the Vanishing Triangle, which is rough terrain underfoot in the daytime, let alone what it's like at night.
It's pitch black at night.
Yeah.
There is no lighting.
There's no lighting, so it is a
pitch black.
skill to be able to manoeuvre your way around that.
But you know also, Nicola, that this terrain isn't a million miles away from where he lives.
Yeah.
It's only really a very, I don't know, maybe 5 kilometres away.
Where he lived. He's gone, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you would think, even with profiling, for example, even with geographical profiling, normally speaking, the theory is that criminals or whatever offenders, they kind of leave a shadow.
Yeah.
And normally it's they begin their a series of crimes the furthest away from their home or an area where they're comfortable with, but the furthest from their base, and then they move around that. So you find that almost like in a circle, then you would look to the middle of the circle,
yeah,
and that's most likely the area where they would live.
Yeah,
but he took huge risk.
From profiling point of view, there was always so much that everybody was working blind on these missing women and everything. And first and foremost, that there was no crime scenes and no bodies.
No.
So all that anybody was able to work from was where they were abducted from or where they were last seen.
Yes.
And all of those points you're talking about are within this area. And of course, his house is very nearby. But obviously, if you had crime scenes, and it would, be easier maybe to profile what's going on and to geographically locate the kind of most likely place where a suspect would be living. But nonetheless, Larry Murphy goes to prison and he's locked up at least for 10 years.
Correct.
And over that time, investigators in the background are working away on these cases, hoping for a breakthrough.
Of course.
And
nothing happens.
Nothing happens.
No.
And do you mean nothing happens from the point of view, do you think that work was being done there in the background, enough work, or were they just, had a lot of these cases literally hit a stone wall?
I suppose you can say that some work was being done, certainly in Deirdre Jacob's case, for example, because that was so sudden and an incredible kind of mystery as to what happened to her. But I suppose also you can investigate. But if you've nothing to go on, they've already covered the ground several times, and
it's like looking for a needle in a haystack, looking for a body. I mean, you often hear people saying, "Why can't they just go out and search?" But it's just
where are you going to search?
Where are you going to search? Where are you going to start?
I mean, have you seen the terrain? You know what I mean, that we're looking at. It's vast.
Yeah,
vast. I mean, you wouldn't know where to start.
You wouldn't know where to start, exactly. So that was a no-go zone to go looking for.
Well, although they did do some geographical. They did searches
for Deirdre.
Yeah, and physical, digging the ground, whatever else. I suppose the only point that you would have is where he kind of absconded, if you like, when with the Carla woman, as in when he was discovered by the two.
Yes,
that's the only area that you have.
Yes, of course,
to start with.
And that mightn't have been where he last, although
where he would
before he was caught that time, he had put a plastic bag over her head.
Yeah.
Which is what brought you back to where we started with Antoinette Smith, because when her body was found, there was a plastic bag over her head and there was a knot tied in a particular way that was similar.
Yeah. In fact, there were 2 plastic bags over her head. Now, when her body was discovered and when the state pathologist, who at the time was John Harbison, when he did his what do we call it? Post-mortem.
Post-mortem.
He couldn't be conclusive about whether it was the bags over her head which had smothered her, or whether she was dead beforehand. So that was unfortunate that he couldn't go any further. But I think with new DNA, which keeps developing all the time, and we have had very incredible kind of breakthroughs with the advancement of DNA. For example, John Creer. That maybe, now we've even had further advances that we go back. You have to just keep going back.
Keep looking.
Yeah.
But there's certainly a lot of elements in the case of Antoinette Smith and the rape victim who survived a murder attempt on her life.
Yeah.
And another thing that could possibly link those two, was there shoes found?
No.
So Antoinette Smith's shoes were removed. And she certainly had them on her. We know that she was out, for God's sake, at a concert.
And also then out afterwards, continued. She was,
right.
But she had shoes.
Okay. And how unusual would that be in cases where bodies were found without shoes?
Most unusual. Most unusual. So they are the kind of MOs that are left behind.
Yeah.
Do you know?
And they're the kind of strands, the links that are drawing these cases together.
Yeah.
In prison, he befriended two other inmates. He was a kind of a loner in prison, I think.
He was,
from all accounts. But he befriended two men who were also serious criminals. And, at one point, as it was coming up to his release, I think the guards who had worked on Operation Trace, were now in the Serious Crime Review team, went in to talk to them.
Correct.
To ask them, had Larry Murphy ever said anything about any of these cases, and to talk to him. And did they also put the new evidence in the Deirdre Jacob case to him at that stage? I mean, he was released, I think it was 2010, was it? Was it all that time ago? Where's the years gone?
I know.
But certainly I recall that he was quizzed if he'd anything to tell them, is all they could really ask him, and he said no.
Yeah, he said no.
He didn't want to talk to them. But maybe it's in the years since that the new sort of strands of evidence has come up in the Deirdre Jacob case.
Yeah.
That link him to
he was friends with one guy in prison. Now this person had been imprisoned. He assaulted a man. He actually came from the Midlands. He assaulted him, and the man fell and obviously died. He was the one who actually contacted the Gardaí,
right,
and said that he would like to make a statement, which he did do.
This guy had been drinking with Larry Murphy one night in the cell.
Yeah, that's right. When he told them details about Deirdre Jacob, etc. The reasoning for it was, according to his statement, that he wanted to make the statement because he had a daughter himself. He wasn't trying to get some kind of
early release or anything.
This wasn't. He said, I have killed a man and I deserve to serve my time.
Right.
So out of that came finally a review of the Deirdre Jacob case.
Now that night they got pissed up on hooch, prison hooch.
Yeah.
You've seen the statement, obviously, so correct me if I'm wrong, but he sort of told him a scenario about Deirdre Jacob.
Yeah.
Boasted.
Yeah.
And sort of said that he had punched her, I think, in the face and overwhelmed her very quickly.
Yes.
Pulled her into the car and driven off.
Correct.
And that he drove to an area, whether or not they ever identified it or not, I don't know, but it was near a lake, and that she had sort of come to and struggled.
Yeah.
And Larry Murphy, allegedly, on this drunken night, told his inmate pal that he had killed her because she struggled too much.
Yeah. Keep her quiet.
And it's a very reasonable explanation about what could have happened, given the lack of evidence, the lack of anything from the minute she disappeared.
Correct. Yeah. It's the only person who knows is Larry Murphy, and you're also depending on the credibility of his inmate, cell inmate. And as I said, to me, the fact that he's not looking for early release, he's explaining that he has a daughter, and this guy shouldn't be wandering around, and the fact that he absolutely admits that he killed a man, and so therefore he deserves to serve his time.
Yeah.
So he's saying, I have nothing to gain here.
Sometimes we have to take information from criminals because they're the only people close enough to either the other criminal or, in the case of organised crime, the actual action that know the real details. And, you know, they come for all sorts of reasons and with all sorts of motives. And you look at that motive and you wonder, am I okay with that? He clearly wasn't going to get out of jail or gain anything from this. So
that's important.
It is important, no doubt. It's important. Unfortunately, Larry Murphy was released without ever having to answer any questions.
Some police officers who had been on the periphery, over the years, would say that, in fact, that was an error, that he wasn't arrested on his release.
Yeah, because when we were launching the documentary the other night, we were discussing how if you have some new evidence that you can arrest a suspect, but you can only question them if you don't, at their behest, if they will be okay with it. So that new evidence, and the new evidence we're talking about, is a possible CCTV image of Larry Murphy in the post office just in the aftermath or previous to Deirdre Jacob visiting that day. Evidence that he left his card in her grandmother's shop and had been working in the area at the time of her disappearance. Was that available, that stage that he was released, or did that come later, when at this point he had gone to the continent?
Yeah, of course it was available.
Yeah.
But they would have, but that evidence would have been available even in 1998.
Yeah.
You know. So
it was there. Yes, of course it was. Sure, they had all that time to find it.
And he just closed the thing down by saying that.
So was it a mistake, do you think, not to arrest him, or would they have got any more out of it? They would have put this to him, and
I suppose
he was in a position that he could say,
I suppose it's
no
a judgment
comment.
call, really, isn't it? Yeah.
Might have put a little bit of pressure on him, but he doesn't seem to be a guy that feels much pressure.
No.
Yeah.
He's almost like one step ahead of you.
Yeah.
And he left school very early, either 14 or 6. I think it was 14. He always showed an interest in carpentry, and was kind of adopted by this man. His name actually was Doyle, his teacher, who kind of took him under his wing and developed his craft.
Yeah.
Or helped him to develop his craft, but never underestimate his acumen because even as a master carpenter, you've got to work out the fine details in a mathematical way, which is very disciplined, and he carries that skill with him,
right?
And most likely carries it into whatever he does.
And it allows him travel as well, because you don't necessarily need the language skills for a trade like that.
No.
I think there was at one point he was in Barcelona. Did he have his passport stolen? And he had been working in the boats, like the seasonal
of course.
work.
Yeah.
But he left Ireland and he went to the UK. He's been in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
He was videoed by a media organisation in Amsterdam.
Yeah. Also in France.
In France he was, yes. He took a boat to France.
Yeah, and he also visited Africa.
What was he doing there?
He was on a charity, part of a charity organisation. Again, because of his skills, that would have allowed him to... I think they were building units in Africa.
Right.
There is probably... I've not been able to confirm which charity it was.
Nobody has ever caused the same sort of hysteria among the public. Every now and then we get a blast still of messages in that he's in Wexford or he's here, there, everywhere. He never returned to Ireland, though. Sure, he didn't.
Well, he was warned by his brother never to return.
And he was followed around by the media if he
course
actually
he was.
genuinely was here.
Yeah, yeah.
So he's 13 years gone out there. And, you know, I was a bit perturbed to hear that the threat level they have on him as regards surveillance on him has reduced significantly
Yeah.
because he hasn't been caught doing anything.
No. In Ireland, because the sex offenders register only became operational a year after he was released from prison. So he's not on the sex offenders register here, but he is on the sex offenders register in the UK. And he's been really very cooperative. And
He's currently living there in London.
In London. But what initially, obviously, he was rated as high risk for reoffending, and now that has been reduced to medium risk.
Right. He'll never go under that, I imagine. You'd like to think. Yeah.
I can't imagine it, because even when he was in prison, he refused, obviously, to have any therapeutic involvement. He wouldn't chat to the psychologists, etc. So they actually had to, from a distance, evaluate his behaviour and whatever else. And the evaluation was that he can be quiet and controlled, and then he can go into a rage. But they, in the end, said that his propensity to reoffend was high. Yeah. And, you know, he could be going in a rage and then he was controlled. You know what I mean? He's psychopath.
Yeah. Well, he's that for sure, yeah. Which is something that gives him the ability to go and settle elsewhere and live anywhere in any community without the familial ties that most of us would need, and the community ties and the familiarity of maybe where you've grown up, etc. That he doesn't need any of that.
No.
He can exist anywhere, and he doesn't even need people. Because he is that sort of lone wolf, even though he has been over the years seen in the company of other offenders.
Correct.
Who are pretty nasty guys too.
He's able to hold his own.
Yeah.
But I think never underestimate him, is really what I think. And the other thing, he's assumed a new identity in the UK.
What's his name?
His name now. He's actually changed his name by deed poll, and now his name is Charlie Doyle. But Charlie is Charley.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
And funny enough, if you look at the Irish translation for Charlie it means free man.
Right. Right.
That could be just a coincidence.
It could be. It could be.
Mm-hmm.
So, this documentary, by the way, which is beautifully made and filmed, and I said the other night at the launch that I thought, well, you know, it's so sinister, but the landscape is beautiful as well.
Incredible. Yeah.
The landscape is similar because of the content and the context in which we're looking at it, but it is beautiful. And you're at the centre of this documentary because you have been investigating it throughout your journalistic career and beyond.
Yeah.
And I suppose, what are your hopes for this? I mean, it's a very powerful piece of television. And we know that the file returned from the Director of Public Prosecutions in relation to a murder charge against Larry Murphy for the disappearance of Deirdre Jacob, and it came back with no prosecution. That has disappointed a lot of people, and Superintendent Martin Walker even explained the other night that the Gardaí believed that they had proved essentially that Deirdre was dead, because in other cases, when you're going to court on a murder charge with no body, the reasonable doubt might be maybe this person's still alive, but they felt they had, you know, really worked hard to sort of prove that, which is a terrible thing for her parents, as all of this is. But there's disappointment there about that decision.
I think there is. The decision, the file went to the DPP. It took a long time for them to make a decision, like 2 years or thereabouts. In the end, the DPP said that, or they decided that there was insufficient evidence to bring charges on the basis that what the Gardaí were providing was hearsay evidence, effectively. And this wasn't strong enough, they felt, to bring a successful case.
Okay. In the meantime, the disappearance of Annie McCarrick has been upgraded to a murder
Correct.
inquiry that's been revisited
Yeah.
as well. And we'd say maybe Larry Murphy isn't the only person of interest in that case.
No. I suppose one of the extraordinary things about the Annie McCarrick case is why it took 30 years to upgrade it to a murder. Extraordinary.
It is,
Yeah.
indeed.
Like,
And with all the pressure that came on
Correct.
from
Yeah.
her family, never relented. They never
No.
gave up.
yeah. And you also had like the US ambassador at the time. She also put pressure on. There was a lot of pressure coming from all sides.
Yeah.
But the fact that it took 30 years is
Yeah.
crazy, because the actual substance of evidence and whatever else hasn't changed.
And again, the point of that being, when you have a murder investigation and if you have a suspect, you can arrest and question them.
Correct.
If somebody is missing, you cannot do that.
No, you can't. I mean, obviously then for 30 years, Annie was assumed to be an unacceptable missing person.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah. What is that?
What does that mean?
That's really no man's land.
It
isn't
is no man's land.
For everybody.
And even now, the person or the persons who are sort of who've come to the fore, if you like, they were always there.
If you were calling the shots on this going forward, what would you be demanding happen?
In which case, no.
Well, I think in all of them. I mean, so in Antoinette Smith, would you be looking for a full review of that case and
Totally.
particularly focused on forensics?
Forensics, yeah.
Because you're seeing the links, the possible links between Larry Murphy, his victim who survived,
Correct.
that MO that was used
Yeah.
in that case, and possibly he was, 22 when Antoinette
that's
Smith
right.
went
Yeah,
missing?
yeah. And I do know he likes music.
And I think you also pointed out in the documentary that all offenders, serial offenders, they advance
Correct, their skill.
their
yeah.
skill.
Yeah.
And that possibly somebody at 22 who would leave a victim where they were later found, 6 months albeit, which is a long time, but that they could hone that skill and then another victim down the road would be left where nobody could
Correct.
find them.
That would be a kind of, it would, I can't say normal because it doesn't
It's
sound
reasoned.
right. It's a reasoned thing where a serial offender perfects his art, with each offence,
Yeah.
of course.
In the case of Jojo Dullard, is there anything that should be being done now?
Jojo, it's difficult, but I mean, her sister, who now has passed away, she worked tirelessly, tirelessly, and there were searches carried out, etc. And also, it's not. Again, Larry Murphy lived very close by,
Yeah.
so I don't know what else they could do.
I suppose in a way, keep it alive. And
Exactly.
Keep
That's the
those
whole point. That's all you can do.
reappeals and hope somewhere down the
Yeah.
road. A little tiny little
All
piece
you
of
need is a
evidence.
smidgen.
Smidgen to yeah.
And, it's for people to say, oh, I'm sure that's not relevant.
Yeah.
Never say that to yourself. If you have something on your mind, bring it forward.
Annie McCarrick obviously has been upgraded to a murder inquiry,
Correct.
and the Deirdre Jacob remains a murder inquiry,
Yes.
and obviously that's still an open book, and any further information that comes in. The cold case reviews can often be very, very slow.
Very. But I suppose really it depends on, well, at the end of the day, Nicola, it's the matter of committing funds, committing finance to these upgrades, if you like. Mm-hmm. And it really all depends on what finances are made ready to these cold cases.
I was talking to a journalist in Canada recently who dropped into the conversation that it was still an unsolved murder inquiry, so it automatically went into the cold case unit after 5 years.
Yeah.
And I was like, that is such a obvious thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
A fresh set of eyes on something like that.
Exactly.
And these cases, it's not as if there's hundreds of them.
No.
There isn't very many of them. It is a hugely rare thing to happen.
But also, Nicola, you have to look at the fact that these missing cases, and there are others that are not involved in this particular documentary, they all happened within a kind of a 10-year time span. And there's been nothing, these clusters, there's been nothing like them since. Mm. So how do you explain that? Like we've sort of 12 murderers running around the place and they all were really... They really got a break. The
perpetrator was either dead or maybe was locked up, was he?
Exactly.
Now, there's another aspect of the documentary which is utterly chilling, and it did keep me awake the other night. Like, I don't get scared easy, but those underground tunnels.
That was amazing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And we'll just explain it in brief so as not to, give away everything that's in the show. But there is this ancient sort of underground...
chamber
in an area that is as close as a profiler can get to where a possible perpetrator like Larry Murphy could have left his victims. And it should be searched.
Oh, this is a contribution made by a forensic
geologist. Is he? Yeah.
And he actually is Irish, although he actually is based now in Frankfurt. And he...
David Kenny is his name.
David Kenny. And he's been looking at these cases for the last 12 years.
Yeah.
Off his own bat. Mm. And he has discovered we know that the terrain near where the Carla woman escaped is a very ancient. There's a very ancient subterranean underground, and he has been quietly working away, and he has discovered ancient chambers under the ground, and that he has now decided he's going to prepare a report for the Gardaí.
And he believes...
He actually, off his own bat, also involved search dogs from the north of Ireland.
Cadavers.
Mm. And extraordinarily, they have pinpointed separately, not together, the two dogs, separately, the same spot.
Yeah.
So you can't let that rest.
No, and surely a search of a pinpointed area isn't that big a deal.
No.
We're not talking about go out there
30 miles
no.
No.
We're talking about
and also, the important thing is to get a warrant to search the area.
Yeah.
Because part of this land is private property. So we need no fumbling or distortion or contamination of evidence. So I would hope that that's the one thing that'll come out of this.
Yeah. At the one at least. I think it is, again, it is such an interesting documentary. It's in 2 parts. It's called 6 Silent Killings, Ireland's Vanishing Triangle, and it starts streaming on Sky and Now on November, not December.
Sunday.
I haven't missed it.
12th.
The 12th, exactly. So Geraldine Niland, thank you very much.